Yes, guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance Podcast. So in today's episode, we are joined by Matt Croyle. So I know Matt from our time at university, and now we're pals. And we're going to chat through triathlon, okay? And disclaimer with this one is I don't know much about triathlon, so it's a really good conversation for me to have, just to really upskill me. And it's cool learning about new stuff. So you're going to get an insight into the triathlon program, okay, at GB level, which is really interesting because there's a lot of nuances that I just didn't even consider. And that's kind of the benefit of being involved in one particular sport, is you can really zoom in on specific things and a very minute detail. So really good chat with Matt. At the end, he kind of puts his information out in terms of Instagram and all that type of thing. So do reach out to him. I'll put all that information in the show notes below. But as always, if you enjoyed the episode, reach out, tell me. You know, it's good for me to know that you enjoy these episodes. And if you feel like there's somebody out there that would benefit, get that over to them. Give them a little bit of a share just so they can listen as well. All right. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. This is me and Matt Croyle. Yes, Matt, how's it going? Welcome to the Adapt Performance Podcast, mate. Thanks for coming on.
No worries. Yeah, thanks for having me, mate.
Mate, I'm going to give the listeners a little bit of an insight into the hard work that it actually took me to get you on the podcast. So numerous messages, and in the end, it was a meme, a beautifully crafted meme that got him over the line. So I think that's going to be my new invitation style, I think.
That meme was good. That it was what got me over the line, to be honest. I saw it. I was like, well, I can't not come on now. He's put at least 5 minutes of effort into that.
At least. Right then, Matt, give us a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of who you are, why have I got you on the podcast, and what you currently do.
Yeah, so my name's Matt Croyle. I guess I know you from university initially, and now we're good friends. And I guess a bit about my background. Went to Sheffield Hallam University, where I did undergrad and postgrad. So I did those both in sports science, and then the second one was in applied sports science, I believe. And from there, I kind of went to work in like a plethora of a few different roles, but particularly around age group sport, youth sport, and also university. So I worked across a whole kind of like that multi-sport discipline. So I was exposed to a variety of sports, a variety of different situations, ones where you don't have really anything to use, you've just got a field, to others where we had a little bit more equipment. We've got physios working there and stuff. And that had eventually led to me being successful in the role for the British Triathlon role. So I was working 3 days a week across the Olympic and Paralympic programme, and then 2 days a week with the multi-sport role through the EIS. And then I've stayed within that role. I'm still in that role now, except the multi-sport part has changed a little bit for me. So I'm doing 3 days a week with triathlon and then 2 days a week with British shooting, which is still fairly new to me. And my week looks a little bit different with them because it's a remote-based role and travel to camp. So I'd say I'm in Loughborough with the triathlon guys most of the time, and then I dip in and out of kind of my British shooting role as and when needed, and the rest of it is remote.
Love it. Man, that's cool. I personally feel like that route is very common with the people that I've had on. Maybe it's because it's been Sheffield Hallam based, but the mentality of getting a multi-sport experience and becoming a generalist, a good problem solver, having no resources, having medium resources, and probably now where you're currently at, I imagine, you know, not to get you in trouble with the bosses who may be listening, but I reckon you could get anything, you know, signed off if you needed to, if it was in the name of performance.
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to all of those situations, right? And I think the pros massively outweigh the cons when you're developing, and being in those situations, like you said, just put you in so many different situations. I think they can initially and in the time and in the moment feel really frustrating. And I think there's definitely times where I've been frustrated, where I've not had the resources I want, or maybe not quite got the athletes that are quite as dedicated as you would like. But really, it teaches you a lot about communication, about using what you have, and about the way you plan a lot. And then, in my scenario now, I have more resources available for me. If I can prove that we kind of need it, or it might have an effect on performance, then I might be able to secure that funding for that. But equally, I've probably got some blind spots where I'm actually being a bit lazy around keeping up with certain bits of information, or we've got physiologists working with us, got nutritionists, so maybe I fall behind on those pieces. So you get a bit more of that holistic, you're doing everything when you're an S&C coach with not many resources around.
It's yeah, you're right in what you're saying there. It's definitely a pros and cons situation. I think I always have this up and down with like staying in your lane versus outsourcing and using the team around you. And I guess it all depends on the environment around. But I think I was thinking literally this morning as I was kind of pottering around the house making my coffee and stuff, how I've had some experiences in my career so far that have been so far away from what I would class as performance, but I feel like I've had a direct correlation to me being the coach or the communicator that I am now. And one of the things I was thinking about, do you remember Chris Fitzgerald from Hallam?
Yes, yeah.
So, for a little bit of backstory, if people don't know Chris is he's a strong man. He's super strong, really good coach. But he's done his PhD in using exercise as a recovery mechanism or a recovery tool for drug and alcohol addiction. And I can remember doing. I was doing circuit classes for him for the drug addiction group, and that was such a eye-opening experience. Like you've got up the road, I think I was working with some TAS athletes, that are trying to be high performing. And then 10 minutes later, I'm down at the bottom of the hill and I'm trying to teach somebody who's literally 3 days off heroin or whatever, how to squat properly and try to keep him engaged. And I found that such an interesting thing because you're wearing so many hats in one day. And that to me is one of the things that I would lean on is like being able to dart from situation to situation and use problem solving. I don't know if you kind of have those types of scenarios that you can kind of draw upon.
Yeah, definitely. I've not got one quite as extreme as that juxtaposition, but yeah, like within kind of university settings, whether it be working with teams that really there's some people there that don't want to be there because they're just kind of they need to attend X amount or whatever. Or I can think back to some times where it was a uni of Hertfordshire and we had a couple of kind of classes like Olympic lifting ones that kind of any student could come to really. It didn't even have to be students. And you get someone that's turned up, actually, they've never done any training in the first place. They've just kind of said Olympic lifting, oh, that sounds cool. And then they end up there and you've gone from, yeah, like you said, coaching one session with a high performing individual into another one where someone's a really low training age. And I think ultimately that just demonstrates your ability to change communication styles, to read the situation in the first place. And I think young practitioners should try and expose themselves to those kind of situations, whether it be personal training, fitness instructor, and even if that involves sitting on a desk for a bit, just so you can get a bit of time coaching someone later on in the evening or whatever that is. Utilize those opportunities, put yourself in a variety of situations is only going to help you down the line when you're also put in, okay, they might be more performance driven, but a variety of situations. Again, there's always kind of components that are going to carry over, whether it be communication, listening skills, decision-making processes, or utilising the MDT around you.
100%, mate. I'm glad we're aligned on that, and I pretty much could have predicted that. I don't think that's going to be a controversial opinion anyway. I think that's most people that are in the industry probably have those. Yeah. So go on then, give us a little bit of an insight into triathlon. So as a little bit of a disclaimer, mate, I know very, very little about triathlon. So give us a little bit of an upskilling session on what triathlon is at the current level where you are.
Yeah, so I work across Olympic and Paralympic, and if we start with we'll start with Olympic guys. So when they get to the Olympics next year in Paris, they'll race Olympic distance or standard distance, it's also known as, which is a 1,500 meter swim, a 40 kilometer bike, and a 10 kilometer run. But throughout the season, they will also dip into sprint distance races, and sprint distance racing is what the para guys race at the games. So that is 750 meter swim, a 20 kilometer bike, so it's just half, and then a 5 kilometer run. And obviously we've got the two transition points between those. So from a swim to a bike transition and a bike to a run transition. And in the para, we have quite a few different categories. So we've got wheelchair, we've got visually impaired, and then we have PTS 5, 4, 3, 2. So 5 will be our most able athletes, all the way down to PTS 2, where you have the most impaired athletes. So they all race the same distance. So that's a little bit in terms of like the actual, like, I guess, generic demands of what they have to go and actually deliver on the day. The only other kind of key difference between para and Olympic is para is more of a time trial. So although you're racing other people, you're not allowed to draft, so you're not allowed to sit behind them on the bike, which reduces the person who sat behind's power that they have to put out to sustain a given speed. Whereas on the Olympic side, it does become a bit more tactical because they're allowed to draft. It's draft legal racing. So you could have a pack, a bit like in the Tour de France going on at the moment, a pack of riders of 15, 20 or whatever, and the person sat in the middle is putting out less watts than the person sat on the front. So then it becomes a bit more tactical in the way you approach that. So that's kind of on the demands. Where do you want me to jump to from there?
Mate, I'm trying to get my head around all that, to be honest with you. I think then go down the route of, from a physical standpoint, like what are you trying to develop as an S&C coach then?
Yeah, I don't want to say it depends, so I'm not going to say it. So I think it's something we can hide behind sometimes, but I'll try and be kind of deliberate in what I say. Definitely athlete-specific goals always comes down to it at the position I'm in, because I'm generally not working with low training age athletes. Sometimes we'll get a low training age athlete on the para side if they're a talent transfer. So, for example, if we're getting a cyclist who's come off program, he's coming over to triathlon, but he's never run before, which does happen, then we have to kind of think about, okay, well, bike's probably taken care of. It's probably above and beyond where he need it to be. Okay, then maybe they did some swimming as a kid. That looks okay. And actually, run is probably the place we need to focus our time and effort on. I've lost myself there. Where was I?
Athlete specific.
Yeah. So, it's down to exactly what their goals are. So I have some athletes where swim is a crucial factor. So if we take the swim, for example, usually when they get into the water, they're going to split into some groups because there's quite a large amount of athletes. They might split into a front group and a rear group. And if the athlete has a really strong bike and run, it might be okay for them to just be in that second group or be in the first group and just in the middle, but not leading it out. So it depends really. It comes down to tactically what they also need to achieve. So for that person who's got a really good bike and a really good run, being really strong in that swim is something that's really important. So that's probably where we'll invest our time. And that's just the general principles and approach I would take when we sit down within an MDT and we have our athlete meetings. Okay, what are they trying to achieve and how am I going to best support that? So there's obviously a load of different ways we can support swim. Within bike, particularly, that's a really big opportunity to create time between athletes in the race because it's the largest portion of the race, and we can really cover a lot of distance. So if we can get an athlete 3 seconds quicker on their swim, let's say, actually we can probably get them 25, 30 seconds quicker on the bike and they'll just make up that time anyway. So that might be the better place. Yeah, our athletes are still able to produce a really fast run off the back of bike, but there is research showing that our stiffness qualities essentially, at least for like the first 10 minutes of the run, are going to be compromised once we get off the bike. So you've gone from that bike, you're onto the run. We've got to reduce stiffness qualities. So essentially, we're not able to transfer force as efficiently into the ground. And we know running economy or running efficiency is really important in terms of overall run performance. So actually improving stiffness in run is a really important thing. So they've got that almost like that higher threshold of stiffness, so that when they get off the bike, we can access that stiffness at a sooner point. But that's something really important to remember, that stiffness quality is altered off the bike, and the triathletes anecdotally do talk about it a lot. So they'll typically kind of put some sessions in the lead up to a race where they go from the bike onto the run.
Is that so? In terms of the stiffness qualities being reduced after the bike, then is that purely just from fatigue through the musculature, so the calves, the quads, everything there? It's just muscularly they don't have the contractile power to do it. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, I think so. The research doesn't really go into some of the mechanisms as such, but yeah, from my understanding, it would be that, and there's probably a bit of a neural aspect to it as well. Because the body does eventually respond. That kind of decreased stiffness is only kind of at that start point in the run. So I think it's probably positional wise. So on the bike, generally they're set up in a position where it used to be on the para side, it's much more of an aerodynamic position because they've got some slightly different rules, which I won't go into, but they can essentially get into a bit of a nicer aerodynamic position. So they'll generally use a bit more hamstring, a bit more glute than they will quad. So they'll almost like try and use that position to help kind of save quad in particular. And then once they're onto that run, you're in a position where hopefully you're a little bit fresher. But yeah, ultimately there's probably both. There's probably some neural components to it as well as actually morphological components.
Got you. So when it comes to kind of getting these guys better at being stiff in those first, I think you said 10 minutes, what's the training kind of look like behind that? How are you approaching that?
Yeah, so I try and keep it simple. I've had some ideas that I might want to dive down in the future, but at the moment I'm just looking at how stiff can we be, and I've definitely not found the end of the spectrum where we've gone too stiff. So I don't think I'll ever find that. So generally we are looking at RSI, as a lot of sports do, to measure stiffness. So we do it through a 10.5 hop test at the moment, but I have also gone down the route of using drop jumps. 10.5 is just the one I've been using at the moment. So
10.5 is
the hop test. So
that's 10 and then you take the
10
best
hops,
5.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so 10 hops takes the best 5 out of them, and then you get your metrics off those best 5. So been looking at that, and have just roughly used 2 to 2.5 as a good, 2.5 to 3 as a very good, and above 3 is an excellent. And we've kind of across para and Olympic got people spread across all of those. Particularly on the Olympic side, we are in that upper end, which is good to see. And we've also had good performances off the back of it. So making a bit of a leap of faith to assume that, but generally we've been in some good places off bike to run, and we've been in those kind of ballparks with stiffness around 3 or above. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been assessing it. In the future, potentially would like to look at some kind of longer duration repeated hop, whether that be like a single leg 30-second, which I think has been looked at before. But there's some options that could look to explore down.
It's I know James Langford, and I had him on the podcast pretty early on actually, and this was around his time at Taekwondo, and we were discussing reactive strength index, and like you said, it's quite popular in a lot of sports. And he was, what was he saying? He said, "Oh, we just see 4s all the time," and I'm like, "Fuck me!" I'm like, I couldn't even dream of a 4. Like I've seen a few. Matt Young, we went to was it Matt Young? Mike Young, that's it. He was at the Child Champion conference that we went to.
Yeah.
And he's got some videos out there of like some 4s, and I think even like a 4.5, and it looks mad, mate. Like it's like a super inflated basketball, how quick they are off the ground. And I know there's little differences between, I use the My Jump app most of the time.
Yeah.
Just from an online space, it just works really well. And I know there's a little bit of a difference in calculation sometimes between the My Jump or the Opto and then force plates. So I'm curious, going back to one of the things you said before, you've kind of moved away a little bit from drop jumps to the 10.5. What's the kind of thoughts there?
I wouldn't say I've just moved away, but I could have come in and gone either way when I came into the role, and ultimately they were already using that 10.5. So from a logistics point of view, keeping it the same for the athletes, not coming in and just changing loads of stuff, it made sense to stick with that. So what I tend to do is I do use that 10.5 with absolutely everyone at the moment. My visually impaired athletes will kind of move around on the plates a little bit, and it allows for that. So one thing I don't take from the 10.5 test, I don't look at any asymmetry stuff, because it becomes a bit skewed if people are moving around. Maybe they land a bit awkwardly on one rep, but that's kind of the beauty of the test, in that you've got the 5 best ones you're looking at. So you screw up a couple, it's completely fine. So I found that really useful with all of my athletes, but in particular, I guess, the visually impaired guys. And the force plates we've got in Power Base are quite big boys, so they allow for that bit of movement around on them. And then I'll dip into drop jumps when I want to look at that, if there's a reason to look at any asymmetry data. So we'll look at those, and we'll sometimes tie them into testing and training if they've got drop jumps within the program. Potentially stick them on for a few sets and just have a look at it that way. And it's actually a bit of testing in disguise.
Yeah, and I think, some of my thoughts around that is obviously they're both technical in their own right, 10-5 versus a drop jump, but I feel people tend to get the hang of doing, 10 hops or, pogos on the spot, or, if it's single leg, double leg, whatever you decide to do, people get the hang of it a little bit more. It kind of gets rid of the shitter reps. If you just take 3 drop jumps as your testing metric, you're relying a lot on them producing 3 good, very well timed, because timing's a huge issue on that. If you try and extend too late, it turns shit. If you don't extend enough, and it has a lot of issues. I still use it. That's probably my go-to just in terms of the My Jump 2 app. It's just the quickest, the easiest. It gives me a ballpark figure.
Yeah, you don't want to be trying to get 10 of those done on the My Jump app.
It'd take me 3 days. We're never testing. That's it. We don't need to test. It's not happening. No, that's interesting around the bike to the run thing then. So is there any, I guess, going from the swim to the bike, is there any kind of considerations there, or is it generally just a little bit of an easier transition for people?
Yeah, it's a bit of an easier transition, and probably out of my lane, as we spoke about earlier. That just comes down to the athlete practicing that transition, having things set up, like they'll have their shoes elastic banded to their bikes so they can run with the bike and then just jump on and don't have to mess about putting shoes on. So yeah, generally that transition's a bit easier. And it'll be about almost them saving themselves in that swim. So they keep the cost low in that swim. So some of them might have different kind of rhythms or with kicking or strategies with kicking. They might not want to kick as much or as hard, or they'll have points of the swim where they push on really hard. But generally it's about, just getting onto the bike for as little cost as possible.
Sick. And you mentioned earlier, when it comes to swimming, you said there was a few different things you can do from an S&C standpoint that can just influence that swim and give them a little bit, more oomph, even if we're talking about a smaller margin in terms of, overall improvement. What are those things that you'd kind of really focus on when it comes to the swim side?
Yeah, I think looking at positioning, number one, can they hit the positions that they're required to in the pool? And if they can't, then what are you going to do about that? So taking a detailed look at actually what's going on when they're in an overhead position, what's going on when they're trying to create a catch position in the pool, because they've obviously got to catch the water with their forearm and then basically push it behind them. So looking at that, is it like an upward rotation issue in order to get overhead? Is there something funky going on around the collarbone? And generally I'll work with the physio in that portion, so it's not just me working there. So we approach it as an MDT, and actually our coach is really good at getting involved with that as well. So positioning, number one, and then I kind of look at it from a actually force point of view, like how much force can we produce in those positions. So definitely not got anything super special in terms of vertical pulling, but we'll progress them through vertical pulling. We'll measure 1RM strength if we need to, and potentially rate of force developments with output sports, which I've messed around a little bit with, but haven't delved into it a lot. Generally speaking, our athletes with swim are probably going to improve if we put an intervention into them. They're going to improve fairly quickly, I'd hope, because we're probably also not hitting the same swimming training volumes as an elite swimmer would. So there's that headroom. So if they need to push on swim, they should be able to invest some time in there and actually create some really good change. One of the big learnings I've made fairly recently was that when there's a big swim project or whether it be a different sport, a big upper body project, it's just ensuring that you're not detraining lower limb wise. And I set out with that program to actually maintain, but I probably wasn't quite maintaining. So it comes back to what's actually more important. Was it putting all this time and energy into swim, which has made swim 5 seconds better, but we've put X, Y, or Z at risk by detraining, whether that be an injury risk, whether that be a performance risk. So it's negating those risks as much as possible, whilst also kind of looking at the broader picture, really, of swim needs to go up, but what about everything else?
That's interesting, mate, and that's something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, is around what is maintenance volume, what is the minimal effective dose, and how can we find that? And I actually had Lee Bell on the podcast a few days ago, actually, from Hallam, and his research being in overtraining and deloading. And we chatted a little bit around just the volume markers that different people have. You could do 10 sets of 10 on something and be absolutely fine and come out of that really well. It might take me one set of 10 and I'm absolutely buried. And, he basically just reflects on the fact that it is a really individual thing, and it's trial and error and trying to build phase on phase, cycle on cycle. And I suppose I might be wrong here, but triathlon probably have a little bit of a database of information around testing and that type of thing, just to lean on a little bit and use.
Yeah, we've definitely got a fairly decent database of testing. We kind of have our standards that we roughly stick to, and sometimes need to push on for certain athletes where actually we know we need them to be above and beyond, or others where we're actually comfortable where they're a little bit less. But going back to your point around kind of the volumes, definitely agree. It's individual, finding out what works for people and sticking with that if it's going well, and not feeling like you just need to change it. I would just urge people to stick with that and not just try and push and push. I guess in my situation as well, if I find the limit, I don't really want to find the limit, because that could end up in me being sacked. But yeah, so I think definitely have done it on myself before, found the limit, and that's fine. That's really useful information for me to go and use in my own training. It's just then when you're working with certain athletes, ensuring that you understand where that limit is, just roughly ballpark wise, and you can get closer to it, but not finding it and regretting finding the limit.
Crossing the line.
Yeah,
that's an interesting topic in itself, isn't it? Like, as S&C coaches, when saying it how it is, you are employed to do a job, and if you do that job badly, which in this case we'll say injure somebody, or you don't do what we should be doing, that could then have big repercussions. And I think as S&C coaches, that leads us to, in some cases, be overly cautious, and it's interesting, because I think if you go back to, if I've got any uni athletes here that I've worked with in the past, they're probably going to think I'm a wanker, but you can push it a little bit more because they don't have the same training demands. They don't have the same kind of pressure on them performing well at an Olympic Games. So I know when I was at uni a little bit more, I would experiment a lot more, because I'm trying to, hone my craft. I'm trying to really develop things and push it. And I suppose at your point, everything needs to be rationalized and needs to be as evidence-based as you can get to really secure those gains.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what going from a university environment into British triathlon. That's probably the thing I noticed the most, was that every little stimulus is a stimulus for these athletes, and it could be the next one that just pushes them over the edge for that day, week, or month. So being really careful with that. Like our Olympic guys, some of them are up at between 20 and 30 hours of training a week. And it's just being very careful with that. That's a hell of a lot of training. And sometimes, I have to remind myself that they aren't doing that much. Like, they are on the bike on a Saturday for 4 to 5 hours in the winter, and then they've got to run the next day, and they're swimming 6 days a week or 5 days a week. So it's just being careful with that, being data driven or data kind of guided where possible, but also not losing that instinct of, it's not just a science, it's also a bit of an art. And I had an athlete not that long ago say to me, we've not changed the Achilles loading, ISO stuff. And we've not changed it, it's working. And it's still not changing. It's been like that for 3 or 4 months, which when you're in uni or whatever, you're like, but it has to change every 4 weeks, because it's how it works. When actually it doesn't need to be like that. It can just stay consistent, particularly those kind of things, which are a bit more health outcome rather than performance. But that's kind of my viewpoint.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you said there, which I was going to lead on to this question actually, was around how much they're doing. And I think you said this 20, 25, 30 hours of stuff.
The most is about 28, 29 hours. Yeah. And then I'd say the average, probably 22 to 24, around that. And that obviously varies within the year. You've got periods where they're going out and racing, where training looks a lot different. They've got kind of prep sessions in the lead up to races, versus the winter, where they're getting just a big volume of training in. And run volumes we've seen anywhere from 60 kilometers a week up to 90, 95 kilometers a week, which 90, 95 is a massive volume.
Easy work.
Yeah.
Easy. I'm gonna smash that. That was us in lockdown, mate. We had that little group. We were all just smashing 5Ks, just trying to PB every single day.
Well, I think you boys went out for a run on that Zoom call, and I think I opted for the bike. I think I had a dodgy knee at the time. Because
Yeah,
still got the same dodgy knee now, but
yeah, that's funny that. So I guess in terms of the total volume that these guys are, capturing during a week, then one of the things that in my mind I go to is like, how are we tracking whether they're doing well? Like, is there a wellness and monitoring process? Is there a certain increase of volume that you deem as being acceptable? Like, talk me through that process of making sure we don't cross over that line. Do you have one? Is it trial and error, or is it gut instinct?
yeah. In terms of wellness monitoring, don't actually do any at the moment, but we will occasionally dip in and out of doing it. So with the amount they train and the amount they have on, I think they would get very pissed off if we put a wellness monitoring in front of them every single day. And also, not all of our staff are full time, so therefore, sometimes it would just become bit of a logistical nightmare. So there'll be periods of time, maybe into lead into a race or a crucial time. Maybe they've got a load of uni exams on, and we know that actually their training volume is only dropping a little bit, and because they've got some competitions a few weeks after exams, and that's going to be a really critical point to make sure they don't fall ill. So we cover it every week in our kind of MDT, and even outside of that meeting. But yeah, there's no formal stuff. I'd say we are good at planning as an MDT group. Could always be better, but in particular around rehabs, we're really good around those volumes. So there will be an open conversation between me, physiologist, coach around, say, a return to run. So we have that really dialed in. And say the rest of the time, in terms of swim, bike, run, the coach leads on that alongside the physiologist. So any week to week changes probably aren't significant. I think we're pretty good at getting like a consistent kind of chronic amount of training in. It's probably the situations, again, I mentioned around racing, where it then changes a little bit. So, gone through winter, they've been consistent all the way through winter. Get to race season, and then they're like flying to Abu Dhabi on a Tuesday, race on the Saturday, then they're back, they got a week back, and then they're off somewhere else. So it's very up and down, and it's just trying to keep that consistency where possible. So gym sessions will try and get them into a gym if they're out in a different country. If they can't get access to a gym for whatever, then it's a hotel room based session or a hotel gym if there's one of those around. But we just try and keep that in there, and they're really well drilled on keeping plyometric stuff, whether it's low level or high intensity, and our calf working is as kind of like minimum standards. So we're really hot on it, and we call it bone loading or tendon loading or calf loading or whatever. I think typically you kind of hear that bone loading or bony issues are what we kind of see the most in triathlon, and I think there is a history of them in all endurance sports. I wouldn't say we actually get that many. And when I've spoken to the physios, actually sometimes our injury audits get a bit skewed by like we've not got loads and loads of athletes, so like one or two bone injuries across X time, then spikes it and it makes it look like a massive problem.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to reduce risk of bone injuries is definitely a big one, and it comes back to that consistency of bone loading to get turnover of the bone. And then sat alongside that is a massive, obviously, component around nutrition and recovery. So yeah, overall, that's kind of what we're looking for through that race period is that consistency of loading. What can we achieve? And you might just regress it. Like, okay, we can't do our really heavy overcoming isometrics or our really heavy 10-second yielding isometrics, 15 seconds or whatever it is. But actually, okay, we're just going to go for a longer duration, 30, 45 seconds with a lower load.
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly what we want, but it's as close as we can get. It keeps them consistently in there and keeps the Achilles happy.
Is that one of the things you tend to use quite a lot, like the isometric work for your guys?
Yeah. again, it comes back to what works. I've got a couple of one athlete in particular who's found eccentrics to be the one for him, and like a lot of the research shows and the knowledge out there is it doesn't matter what type of contraction it is, just as long as you're loading those tendons, you'll be fine. So I generally will go with what the athlete finds works for them, and for most, that's probably a lot of isometrics that I program in seated and standing positions, and for a few of them that really like eccentrics, we keep eccentrics in there. You obviously just then have to be aware of where that is in the week in terms of a muscle damage point of view. Isometrics are obviously a little bit less muscle damage, so do tend towards to lean towards those unless an athlete likes an eccentric.
So I think with that, we I have like a little bit of a journal club going on with Adapt. Got a few of the coaches that are involved, and we've just gone through the Alex Natera Run Isometrics course, and I think his initial story of how he kind of come across overcoming isometrics was, it might have been triathlon, it was long distance running, but he basically said to this girl who did not want to lift weights, where you will not lift a weight, and obviously that's the play on words around isometrics is you will not lift it. Because she was so scared of lifting, and it just wasn't in the culture of endurance sports at the time. And, me doing a little bit of work in mountain biking, particularly the cross country guys, is there seems to be a little bit of a reluctance in that to get stuck in and lift some tin and really kind of buy into it. And it definitely takes a little bit of effort from our point of view to educate and build that buy-in. How have you found that from an endurance standpoint? Are they used to lifting? Do they enjoy lifting? Do they see the benefit? Or do you still have those outliers that are just, nah, don't want it?
Don't think any of them would say now that they enjoy it, but hopefully they don't not enjoy it. But the buy-in's been good. I think I've come in as a new practitioner, and I've been fortunate enough to have two really good practitioners before me that had set them off on the right path. But generally speaking, I've had a couple of new ones, and it is I think when they come into the program, they're if they've not been exposed to S&C previously, they're used to swim, bike, and run, and when the DOMs hit from a gym session, it is a little bit different. So I think going in with a bit of a soft approach can help alongside that educational piece, but going in with a soft approach can definitely help. But generally speaking, all my athletes will load heavy. I think there's periods where maybe we back off once we get to a certain intensity, but I think we've been pretty good recently about trying to just push past that. Like I think they plateaued a little bit. They get to like say 60 kilos and you got the blues on, and you go, yeah, nice. That's me loading heavy now. When actually it does continue past that. So I think it's just sometimes trying to remind them that we're loading at the right intensities, and you bring it back. I always bring it back to like bone health, tendon health. Bring it back to those, and those things click with them because they've either had problems with bone, they've had problems with tendon, so they click. And once they know there's a reason for doing something, they'll go and do it. Pretty much with our guys, like ultimately, I think they trust all of us as practitioners, and they want to do what they have to do to get to the next level or to stay at the top.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect, mate. It's kind of what I expected, and I think there are a few. You do hear some examples of people at the top that are kind of go against the grain in terms of strength and conditioning and sports science, and that does exist. And I think, it's probably a bigger conversation, but sometimes what it takes to get to the top is actually just not listening to common sense, because there is an element of the determination, the obsession potentially can come at the detriment of listening to those things. So one of the things I want to push on to is the NDT side. So in terms of where S&C sits within this program then, so is it the technical coach? I don't know if that's what you kind of call them in triathlon. Is there one technical coach, or is it kind of a swimmer, biker?
Olympic we have one. Paralympic we have two, and they cover all the three disciplines: swim, bike, run. I'm obviously based in Loughborough. The Leeds Centre does have a slightly different setup where they'll have like a swim coach. But yeah, in my specific scenario, we have one coach that covers swim, bike, run.
Got you. And then in terms of, I guess, a huge proportion of their overall training time is going to be, practicing the disciplines. So when it comes to deciding how much volume happens and whether they're going to be in more of a, I don't know, an aerobic block or whatever, is that something that the technical coach does alone? Do you have input on that and you're just the weights and power guy, or is it a back and forward and is the checking and challenging and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think so. Generally, and I've had it. Coach is really good. All the coaches I work with are really good, and one in particular almost like put it over to me like, where do you want to be involved in the process? And we've kind of got down to the point now where he will plan with the physiologist and athlete. He will plan their swim, bike, run. Will then come to me, and then that kind of back and forth kind of exchange will happen. Like ultimately there'll be some scenarios where actually not often, but sometimes, usually within rehabs, and then but outside of that, not often, where S&C will be a critical factor. So if that is a critical factor, I'm probably drawn into that conversation a little bit earlier. But as the training volume is so huge across swim, bike, run, it's probably more of a physiologist. It's a physiologist and athlete, and we're really big on athletes driving their programs. So our athletes are very switched on. They all know what lactate threshold 1 and 2 is. So they're pretty switched on from a physiological standpoint. So they'll plan alongside that, come to me, they'll be the back and forth check and challenge, unless it's required that I'm involved a little bit earlier in that process.
Got you. And where would you say, and this probably is a definite, it depends because it's based on all the things that you spoke about before around individual weaknesses and work on points. But how often are these guys generally training a week from an S&C and getting in the gym?
Yeah, so 2 a week, most people. There's a couple that are on 3 times a week. And then outside of that, there might just be like top ups. So if someone's got a niggle around Achilles, so we've got one at the moment where, there's some load, they're on like a day on, day off loading. They'll load Achilles in the gym on the day on. But actually, some of their gym stuff falls on one of those kind of day off days in terms of Achilles loading. So they're in and out of the gym nearly every day, actually, to make sure that loading gets done. But they're early on in rehab. Yeah, most of the time, 2 to 3 gym session is roughly where they're at. I'd say mostly 2.
Okay. And then I guess we've focused more on the Olympic side at the moment, and I love speaking about the Paralympic side. It's just such an interesting topic, and you're always having to learn and think about things and use some critical thinking there. So give us, is it different with the Paralympic side? So are you having to consider anything else, or is it, you've got your direction, you just have to put a little bit of a Paralympic twinge on it and change things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always coaching the athlete in front of me. From an MDT and a planning standpoint, I think there's a greater medical involvement usually. I think the medical side of things is usually always evolving. We tend to have more medical updates within our MDT around the para side, but also I'm probably a bit skewed because we have more athletes on the para side as well. But yeah, I'm coaching the athlete that's in front of me. So if there's a problem, I still approach it in exactly the same way. They're all advocates of this so that they can, do everything that an able-bodied person can do as well. So really, I don't see my process changing a whole lot with para athletes.
And did you have experience of para athletes before you got into this role, or was that something, that was brand new to you?
Yeah, just a little bit, really not a lot. Like a couple of wheelchair guys, like had covered some Hallam like wheelchair basketball sessions when you were coaching them, I think, and then had one down wheelchair basketball athlete down in Hertfordshire as well. So it was my first time working with amputees and visually impaired athletes in particular. Which has been a really great learning process. And to be honest, they're the ones that know their bodies best, and they're the people that are going to solve their problems best. So like a lot of the time, I'm going, here's an exercise. They go, that's not going to work, and then they go, but I can do it this way. And then they'll help solve the problem for you really. So I've got a pretty easy job when it comes to para guys.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think I've had both ends of that discussion. I guess I've had people that have had. I've had para guys that are really experienced in terms of S&C, and they will give me solutions. You know, I'll say, right, we need a chest press variation. What's going to be the best way of us really loading heavy today? They'll say, okay, right, well, we're either going to strap me down on a bench or floor press is going to be the way. And they can guide it. And, you know, there might be elements where I push back and say, actually, I think you're ready for this. Let's give this a go and see if we can try this next thing. But then I've had the other side of it where they haven't been in the gym before, you know, and depending on, you know, what the impairment is, there's elements of you trying to, you know, slowly bed them into that process and ultimately give them, it kind of starts with a little bit of understanding around, you know what, we're going to try some stuff and it might not work, but we're on this journey together. We are going to explore it. And if it doesn't work, that's fine, you know, because we've just found one way that doesn't work. And it's about encouraging trial and error and play and experimenting. Have you had that, or has that not really been a part of your role so far?
Yeah, definitely. And like it comes with the level of athletes. I've got some para guys that are at the top of the game, have been in 2 or 3 different sports before and know exactly what they're doing. And they don't need too much variation because what they're trying to do is push on a really niche thing within whatever. And then I've got others who are either fairly new to the sport or have come from a different sport, a bit like the talent transfers I mentioned earlier, where they've definitely got that development to make up. And yeah, you have to get a little bit more creative. Me and the physio on the para side have a really good relationship, and we're not scared to, he comes into the gym, I go into physio, and we get into those conversations around specific athletes, and we have a play around, and as long as the athlete's aware and usually they're comfortable within themselves to do that, to find what they can do, what they can't do, and how we can best help them, really.
Yeah, sick. The physio side, mate, I think if I wasn't an S&C coach, I think I would have been a physio because we had I'm trying to remember his name, Danny Paul. Did you ever meet Danny Paul, the physio from Hallam?
Yes, yeah, I did. Yeah.
So he was super nice guy, but whenever you'd have a conversation with him around injuries, I always just left those chats, one, a little bit mind-blowing because I'm like, you know so much and that's incredible, but also like the passion that he had within what he was talking about was like super infectious. You're like, fuck, I want to go away and read about ligaments, you know, and like, I wish I could, well, I don't know. It's never too late to like retrain and just upskill in those areas, is it? Like it can definitely happen.
No, definitely not. And you learn loads from as much as the physios at work take the piss out of me, and at the moment there's only one of me and 2 of them. You do learn a lot from them, and it's about utilising them as much as possible to soak up those bits of information.
I love that they take the piss out of you. Easy target.
Yeah, I am, aren't I? Yeah, they're gonna be listening to this, just loving it.
Buzzing. Mate, that's quality. I want to wrap up there, mate, because I think that was absolutely sick. Again, super interesting for me because I know very little about triathlon, you know, and I've kind of left this with, you know, a little bit more of an idea of what it actually takes behind the scenes. So yeah, I just want to thank you, mate, very much for your time. That was quality. In terms of kind of finding out a little bit more around triathlon, or at least some of the work that you do you have are you a social media boy? Is there any kind of papers or anything that you think people should go, maybe not papers, but like Twitter and all that? That's my kind of audience.
I'm not on Twitter, so you won't find me there. You can send me a follow on Instagram if you want, Croyle39, and just if you want to DM me anything or ask me any questions, I can point out some papers if people want to look at specific papers. But yeah, I've got an S&C page, but it's aimed at ice hockey, as you know, so it's a little bit of a stone's throw from triathlon.
Yeah, love it, mate. Thanks again. That was absolutely sick.
Nice one. Thanks for having me, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Adapt Performance podcast. Let me know what you thought about the episode by leaving a review or sending me a direct message. I'm all for receiving the honest feedback to make sure the episodes grow and get better and better. Like, share, subscribing and following all goes a long way to making sure the podcast reaches the right people. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.